Hello and welcome to the Hackaday Podcast, episode 256, Appendix. Here's the deal. Last week we had this really great roundtable discussion with all the regular Hackaday staff podcasters, and we had so much fun that we went a little bit long, and I ended up cutting that all into one podcast. But Kristina and I stayed on later to talk about a bunch of hacks, and we picked so many good ones that I thought you should at least hear that part too. So without further ado, we've got hacks and quick hacks today, and then we'll wrap it up. It's not really a full episode, but the stuff we covered is so interesting that we just have to share it with you people. You know, it's kind of what we do here. So I'd like to start off with a project by James Warner. IoT Air Purifier makes a great case study in reverse engineering. As it says, James got his hands on an air purifier that sent all of its data off to the cloud, and he wanted to make it speak MQTT so it could talk to the rest of his home automation system. And that meant, in this case, basically trying to get in between the device and its server, man in the middle it, figure out the passwords, the protocol, and reproduce a fake server of his own that then forwards the data within his home. What's really cool here is the way he did it. He got really lucky, and the machine was based on an ESP32. The flash wasn't protected, so he was actually able to download the firmware. The SSH private key was stored in the firmware in plain text, and he still needed to do a bunch of network type hacking to get the protocol figured out because it's easier than reverse engineering an unknown binary, but it helped him get in because everything this thing sent to its server was encrypted. But here he was able to find the decryption key right there. It's funny because Dan was just talking about how he always wants to do reverse engineering projects. He wrote this one up. I know what he's talking about. Tom was just talking about learning about awesome software tools by reading Hackaday projects. And I learned in reading about this one about a tool called ESP32 Knife, which takes the flash image out of an ESP32 and unpacks it into all its component files. And that's actually a really handy Python tool if you've got to work with ESP32s. The other thing that's an absolute classic of reverse engineering here is looking for strings in a binary blob. Like, it's really, really hard to do the low-level binary reverse engineering, but it's so super easy to just type strings file name and hit enter. And it returns all of the ASCII strings in this. And that actually was super handy here because it included strings like s_message_crc_error. And that led James to conclude, for instance, this thing used a CRC checksum in the data it sent back to the server. And so that helped him in diagnosing things later on. Like, the string didn't give the game up to him, but it gives you an idea of what kind of the topology of things are going to be. So between ESP32 Knife, which is brand new to me, and strings, which is just a classic use of an old tool, this is a great project if you want to, like Dan does, dip into a little bit of reverse engineering. Boom.
Boom. My first hack comes from Brick Studios. Lego Coin Sorter is so money. Now, I've been pretty heavy into Lego lately. I didn't get to play with it as a child, so I'm making up for lost time. I've been feeding my own algorithm, and it's showing me more and more videos like this, which I was very happy to come across because I think this is so cool. It's such what a neat challenge to put to Lego to sort coins and to put them in order by value. And this is hard because the penny is maybe a millimeter and a half larger than a dime, and a $50 is huge compared to dollar coins. So Brick Studios solved the penny dime conundrum with a headlight brick versus a regular 1x1 modified brick with a stud on the side. And the difference is about a millimeter. Yeah. And then they made ramps to get the dimes past the pennies and the nickels, and then to get the $50 to the left of the dollars, because they fall last because they're biggest, but then they have to go backward to get to the left of the dollars. So yeah, thought it was very cool.
It does the sorting mechanically, just by time of flight.
Yeah, just gravity and holes. Yeah.
That's awesome. My next hack is a piece of science by Sierra Salter Hunt. Will large satellite constellations affect Earth's magnetic field? And this is a crazy thought that the vaporized aluminum from a bunch of satellites re-entering the Earth's atmosphere is going to contribute enough kind of aerosolized metal in the upper atmosphere that it's going to make our atmosphere more conductive, which of course will influence anyway. Nobody really knows how, but stands to influence the Earth's magnetic field. And she points this out in an interview by saying, imagine you have a magnet that's surrounded in a sphere of some metal that shields the magnetic field from going outside of it. This is possibly what we are doing by making the Earth's upper atmosphere more conductive. Now, what the heck does this mean? And I think that's a really neat question. Things that come out of this, you might think that, like we used to think with the ocean, that we can just dump stuff in it because it's big and the stuff goes away. But the amount of metal particles in the atmosphere is tiny, so tiny, in fact, that the weight of one deorbited satellite is about 7 million times more mass than there is in ionic particles in the Van Allen belts right now. And that's per satellite. And then you multiply this by how many satellites are floating up there. There was also a recent study that did a survey of aerosolized particles in the stratosphere and found that 10% of them are aluminum and other metals whose origin can be traced back to the burn up of space objects. So we're already at a point where 10% of the aerosolized particles in the atmosphere are made up of burned out satellites, and it's only accelerating. And the point is, nobody knows what this is going to do. And this is the point of the paper is, hey, here's something that's potentially big, potentially globally important, and shouldn't we at least be looking at it? And I thought that was a really cool piece of kind of blue sky thinking, but also real science to back it up.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like much good could come of it, but
It does not. I mean, maybe it will be. Maybe it'll solve that problem with me getting sunburned all the time. It'll just all get reflected back out to space.
that would be nice.
Solve global warming by filling the atmosphere up with aluminum and making it conductive.
Oh dear.
Oh dear. We'll get better radio propagation, better shortwave radio listening. Oh dear.
Well, for my next hack, I chose Flirpy Flirples' Altoids 10 keyboard is a brush. Excuse my title. So one commenter was like, "Can we please have an Altoids 10 project that doesn't include the following words?" And I'm like, no, we can't.
Ooh, boo. No, we can't.
So I chose Flirpy Flirples' Altoids 10 keyboard is a breath of fresh air. Is this the ultimate pocket keyboard? I think it is, because it's got a built-in cover, for one thing, right? It's already pocket-sized. It was going to be a 60% build. Yay, that's my favorite, 60%. For small keyboards, that is. But the constraint of switch footprints and the tin itself led Flirpy Flirples to a 40% layout instead. But it's still amazing. Flirpy Flirples used a nice Nano plus ZMK for Bluetooth capabilities, which we were also talking about during the AMA, if you'll recall.
See?
Full circle.
See?
Just a full circle. I really, really love the keycaps and the legends. I think they look great. The letters themselves look great. The symbols look really cool. And the way that Flirpy Flirples did it with printed Cricut legends sealed with UV nail polish, very cool. And if you watch the video, Flirpy Flirples says the action is a lot like a BlackBerry keyboard, and it kind of sounds like one to me, too.
I am laughing myself to death every time you say Flirpy Flirples. And you managed to do it with a straight face like 16 times just then. How do you do it?
It's a great name.
It is. It's the best ever. My next hack is a video, a Wiper Motor 101 from Daniel Simu and his friend Werner. We covered an earlier video of Daniel's where he has built this robotic dummy to do acrobatic stunts with him, and it's pretty awesome. You should go check that out. But what's powering the arms and legs and counterweights of this robotic acrobatic dummy are wiper motors, windshield wiper motors from cars. And this video is a 35-minute long brain dump of Daniel and his artist friend Werner's knowledge about what you can do with car wiper motors. And it is absolutely inspiring if you do anything large and mechanical, because these things are cheap. You can get them for 20 or 30 bucks or even cheaper if you go to a junkyard. They are super duper strong. If you can pull them straight off the car, they come with a linear motion already, because it's, the thing that pushes the lower arm of the windshield wiper across. They're not actually direct driven rotating. They get pushed back and forth. And this like linear oscillating motion thing is often on them. You could drive them on 12 volts because they're meant for cars, which means you can also use them with 4-cell LiPo battery packs, or of course a lead acid car battery. They have different speeds. They come with a 55-to-1 gearbox built in. It's a worm drive, but they all have different speeds to them. And so they'll have a bunch of different sets of pins, which if you use them to drive it, run through different coils in the motor and drive it at different speeds. That's how old school windshield wipers go slow, medium, and high, right? As you just flip these different wires. They're rock solid. They're, if anything, a little too heavy maybe, but they're super strong. They all have identical mounting holes because they're meant to be interchangeable across cars. You can also PWM them if you want to control the speed. And at the very end, Daniel talks about a project he made to turn them into servo motors. And he actually says it's lovely. 20 minutes in, he says, I came across this post on Hagaday where he learned about magnetic encoders. And so he's put magnetic encoders on the output shafts of these things and has converted them into incredibly beefy servo motors for the price of, 25 bucks for the motor plus $3 for a magnetic encoder on eBay. You've got a servo motor that rivals the strength and torque of one of these multi-$100 super expensive industrial servo motors. So it's absolutely lovely. The one caveat is that they have nylon gears in the gear train, and although they're meant to run forever in a car, like, have you ever had your wiper motor fail? No,
Yes.
You haven't. What?
Well, to be fair, it was on a 1966 Beetle in the 90s.
Okay,
6-volt wiper
okay.
motor went out.
If you get 30 years out of a project motor, you're pretty stoked, right?
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. I was going to say you never had one fail, but, well, there you go. But they do have nylon gears, so if you're subjecting it to a lot of repetitive stop-start and back and forth, you can actually eventually shear them. If you're using them for kind of normal and or smooth fluid movements, they should probably last forever. Anyway, if it breaks, it's another trip to the junkyard, and that's a good thing in and of itself. Yeah, I can't believe you had one break. Thanks.
Yeah, because I couldn't really get a replacement because it was 6 volts, and there was like one VW place in town. It was way downtown, and yeah, so I just eventually got another car.
Oh.
Well, also the master cylinder went out.
Yeah, that's the one that pushes you over the edge.
So,
Yeah.
or lets you go over the edge.
Ooh.
My next tag comes from Sasha. It's fail of the week, actually. Fail of the week, PCB LED cube fails successfully. Now, this is hardly a fail in my eyes, in Dan's eyes, or in many of the commenters' eyes, but here we are. Sasha wanted to make an RGB LED cube easier to build, so they decided to design really narrow PCBs to put the LEDs on, 2 millimeters wide, in fact. Yet each has room for 16 addressable WS2812s with as little FR4 as possible. Sasha needed 4-layer boards to accomplish this, and the whole thing raised eyebrows at every board house that Sasha quoted with. In the end, they're unhappy with the fact that the boards block the light from certain angles, which is true a little bit and understandable, but it's still really, 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 really cool. And Sasha, if you want to open source the PCBs, I'm sure people would be very happy about that. Somebody already asked about that in the comments.
I'm sure they would. This is by no means a failure. This is like the you're far too hard on yourself fail of the week. Because the truth about LED cubes is no matter what you do, one of the 5mm LEDs that's off is always blocking one of the ones that's on from essentially any angle you look at it. And, that's just the nature of the beast. You can't win. Adding these super thin PCB frames, worked perfectly. That was chef's kiss, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I got that.
All right.
I'm picking up what you're putting down.
Sweet. I'm putting down quick hacks.
Quick hacks.
For my first quick hack, I'm picking Richard Sewell's tricky 3D printed joinery problem. Give heat staking a try. And this is a neat solution to the ever-present how to make a solid 90-degree joint with 3D printed things. Heat staking is that process where you take something hot and you smush plastic and make kind of that mushroom-shaped top that will hold it in place. Here he's doing it with what look like mortise and tenon joints even. It's a much beefier joint and smooshing them down, and it looks like it's a really neat process that gives him solid 90-degree angles, which lets you print, of course, using the grain in the strong direction, even though your 3D print makes a 90-degree bend. Next up, Peng Chen, retro-styled Rasty laptop packs framework Mobo. That's a motherboard to you and me. This is a reimagining of the Grid Compass, which is one of the first notebooks out there. It actually was made for NASA. They took them up in the early space shuttle launches in the mid-'80s. I think it also shows up in the movie Aliens. It's a sweet old laptop, and this is a modern reincarnation of it that includes, I think completely unnecessarily, but it looks awesome, a complete keyboard redesign. So if you just want that, you can pick that out. And if you want to see the whole DIY laptop, it's worth a look. And last up, I'm picking Dan Maloney's OC piece in defense of anthropomorphizing technology because I just love this. The Hackaday comments are split straight down the middle between people who think that if you form personal attachments to technological objects, you're crazy, and the other half of people who think that if you don't form attachments to technological objects in a similar way to the way you do to people, you're not a human being. And I have no idea which is right, and I think I don't care. But Dan's leading argument here is that people have named things like boats and given them maidenheads and treated them as part of the crew since time immemorial. And what it does is it makes people care more about the inanimate object. And in the case of a boat, it helps them take care of this boat that's getting them across the ocean alive. And in the case of your own projects, when you fall in love with them, it maybe helps give you that kind of extra drive to get through the dark night when not everything's working for you. And, the Pygmalion myth out of ancient Greece, if you don't know about that and you're a hacker, go read up on your Pygmalion. And if that doesn't speak to you, I don't know what will.
My first quick hack comes from Tooltech Geek. Flatpak multi-tool has many dimensions. Tooltech Geek wanted to see if they could build a multi-tool out of flat pieces of laser-cut metal. Well, that seems like a yes, and it turns out it was. They made a few 3D printed versions before committing to having metal cut, and the final product looks really great. It has pliers and a couple screwdrivers, and a 2D Phillips head screwdriver, and a bottle opener, all in one place. Who could ask for more? Next up, I chose check out these amazing self-soldering sleeves from World War II. This is a video from Our Own Devices, and it's what it sounds like on the tin. These things were developed by a sabotage operation during World War II. So the idea is basically you stick a couple of stripped wires into the ends of this tube and strike the center with the side of the box like lighting a match, and the pyrotechnics begin. They ultimately lead to a soldered joint, and then you can just knock off the dried, crusty pyrotechnic material to clean it up, and then you can wrap it up. So yeah, there's a very cool slow burn in the video. It's definitely worth watching. And thirdly, I chose Paul Bryson's Harbor Freight and Lego PCB vise is cheap and effective. So we're back to Lego. This is a problem that we've all faced, holding work while soldering. PCB vise geometry seems to be ideal for a lot of people, especially those who want to look at them under a microscope. So Paul came up with a vise that uses an inexpensive ratcheting bar clamp plus a couple of Lego Technic beams to extend the business part that holds things. Very cool.
And that wraps it up for this special extra edition of last week's podcast. I hope you had a good time listening. If you have any comments, head on over to hackaday.com/podcast, which will actually redirect you to the roundtable one this time. And if you see anything cool or do anything cool, shoot us an email, tips@hackaday.com. And until next week, keep on hacking.
PCB LED cubes fails.
Tricky 3D printed joinery problem giving question mark.
Harbor Freight and Lego PCB by... Gosh darn it.
That was not very good.